everybody. I think we'll get started. There are still people who are coming in, but because we only have an hour and a half, we will get the ball rolling. Talofa lava, good afternoon and welcome everyone to the RESIG workshop on collaborating for consistent scholarship applications for asylum seekers. My name is Amanda Moores-Maile, and I'm from the Centre for Social Justice and Inclusion at the University of Technology in Sydney. I'm a student equity program manager and led the establishment and development of the UTS Humanitarian Scholarship Program. I'm hosting with my RESIG hat on as a scholarship and liaison officer with the RESIG steering committee. I will be your MC for today. Before we go any further, I would like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, upon whose lands the UTS City campus stands. I also acknowledge the lands of the Camaragal people, of which I am living and raising my family. As a Pacific Islander and visitor, I am privileged to stand on country on land that is home to one of the world's oldest living cultures, a culture not dissimilar to my own Pacific culture, and one that is intimately and spiritually connected to lands, waters, and the skies. I pay my respects to the elders, both past and present, and emerging, acknowledging them as the traditional custodians of knowledge for this land, and as people of great ingenuity and innovation. I stand in solidarity for First Nation calls for self-determination, as sovereignty was never ceded, always was, and always will be Aboriginal land. I would like to really quickly also introduce our steering committee members of the Refugee Education Special Interest Group who are hosting this workshop with me today. We have Jindri De Silva from Macquarie University. We have Dr. Meera Varadharanjan from UNSW. We've got our three co-chairs here today, Dr. Rachel Burke, Dr. Lisa Hartley, and I also would like to welcome our co-chair, Dr. Sally Baker, who is from UNSW, and invite her to give a really brief overview of the RESIG and our intentions for today's session. Thank you, Sally.
Thank you, Amanda. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. It's a thrill to be able to bring so many wonderful humans together to advocate and really think practically about how we can respond to what we know from community is a bit of a challenge when it comes to scholarships for people seeking asylum and refugees with temporary protection, in terms of the questions that we ask as institutions for them to respond to, and sometimes subtle but really problematic differences between application processes that universities are drawing on. I'm just going to speak very quickly about the Refugee Education Special Interest Group. We're a group of volunteers. That's really important to recognise. We haven't been asked to do this by anyone. We are a group of colleagues who are interested in enhancing educational opportunities and outcomes for students from forced migration backgrounds, whether they are on permanent, temporary, or still waiting status resolution. We are principally interested in sharing information, so you may well be already a member and get our emails. We also develop resources, and the wonderful scholarships database that Amanda is responsible for is one of those brilliant resources. And we're also really an advocacy network, and so some of our future advocacy will be making an impassioned plea for refugees and equity cohorts, as well as other bits of advocacy that we're doing. So if you're not already a member, we would really love you to join us. Membership is free, and we represent and are represented by colleagues from across the education sector, schools, TAFEs, RTOs, universities. We work closely with community organisations and peak bodies, and of course we have students at the heart of our work and really have their educational needs and ours as educators, advocates, researchers, etc., bringing that energy together to try and open up those opportunities. That's it from me. I'll hand back over to Amanda.
Thank you, Sally. So just a bit of housekeeping. As you can see on the screen, if you can please put in terms of your name on your Zoom, can you put your name and your organization if you haven't done so already? That would just be really helpful for us to know who we're speaking to. You also see that the main session is being recorded. If you do not wish to be recorded, please just keep your camera switched off. Other kind of, housekeeping for Zoom, keep your mic on mute if you are not speaking, but also please enter your questions into the chat. The next part of our session is a panel discussion. Today we're really fortunate to have Jude Stoddard, Margaret Tung, Beverly Bossman from the Asylum Seeker Centre, which is located here in Sydney. The ACR provide practical help for people seeking asylum in New South Wales, including advocating for fair and humane policies for refugees and people seeking asylum. Welcome, Jude, Margaret, and Beverly. I also welcome the wonderful Gil Meek and Ruby Valletta from the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre. ASRC is based in Footscray in Melbourne, and similarly the ASRC provide a range of different services and support, including frontline services such as food bank support and healthcare, advocacy, and education and employment programs. Welcome, Gil and Ruby. Once again, if you have any questions, please add them to the chat and we will filter those through at the end of the Q&A, at the end of the panel session for the Q&A. I will flip back to Sally, who is moderating this discussion.
Okay, thank you so much. And so this is a real opportunity, I think, particularly for those of us who work in universities, to hear what it's like on, I don't want to use a war metaphor, but working directly with students. I'm trying to avoid saying frontline, working directly with students to help complete applications and can help, I think, for us as universities to understand some of the barriers that we might not anticipate and that students face when completing the application processes that we as universities require students to do. So it's a pleasure to introduce our colleagues from the ASC and the ASRC to speak to their experience of helping students to complete applications. So I'll open the floor to Jude, Beverly, Marg, Gil and Ruby. And if you are also someone who works with students, please do consider adding something at the end. We're going to hear from our colleagues for about 25 minutes and then we'll have some space for question and answer. So if you have any questions, you can pop them into the chat or you're welcome to ask them at the end. And so I'll hand over to our colleagues.
I think this is Jude. I think Margaret was going to start off. I think Margaret's
You're on
muted.
mute, Margaret. Unmute.
Sorry. Okay, right. I shall start. Now, Jude Stoddard started the university program at the Asylum Seeker Centre over 5 years ago, and the demand for services really grew over the years. We now have around 20 clients studying with the scholarships at the university in Sydney, as well as 6 graduates. It is being run by volunteers, and over the years, we have encountered many challenges in the university application process in supporting our clients. Because of the scarcity of scholarships, each applicant needs to apply to as many universities as they can, which means problems are multiplied, and as they need to also negotiate slight differences between universities. So each of us will talk about a different area today. I'm going to be focusing on the university application processes. There are 4 areas I want to talk about. Firstly is access to information. It is very hard for asylum seekers to find information on the overall process. access to scholarship information, and the university-specific early offers. Many ended up missing out on applying for scholarships due to misinformation. Macquarie University ran a series of online workshops in 2021 for prospective students, which was fantastic. And I think Victoria University's joint info session is a great model, and Gil is going to talk about that. Jill will suggest a model through the University Admission Centre for your consideration. Now, apart from collaboration between universities, it would be very important for the internal communication within university to be improved. For relevant section of the university, admission, international student, equity, etc., to talk to each other, ensure the whole process will work smoothly and avoid administrative problems. For example, to make sure that the offer of place does not expire before the scholarship results are known. A contact person in each university who has the brief to troubleshoot difficulty with asylum seekers will help them greatly. We find clients spend an enormous amount of time waiting for email to be answered, for someone to call them back. In many cases, we're talking about people who are working and very difficult for time to find time to do these, to wait around for answers. Hardship, it's the next issue. While officially asylum seekers are considered as international students, in fact, their lived reality is a million miles from that label. If we're serious about equity, then asylum seekers should not be treated as international students or your average local student. For example, application fees charged for admission is a huge burden for them. Every dollar counts in an asylum seeker's struggle for survival. They need to be exempt from such fees, and the process of exemption should be clear for them, so they don't need to ask every time. Another example is early offers. Just the other week, I assisted a family in dealing with an early offer that requires a deposit of over $16,000. As the family realized very quickly, this is not really an offer for them at all. Lastly, selection criteria for scholarships. We always wonder what attributes do the university really want in their humanitarian scholarship awardees, and the evidence they require should clearly reflect these attributes. We understand some of the requirements, for example, academic achievements, demonstration of hardship, interests, aspirations, but why do so many universities require evidence of extracurricular activities? This is an area our clients have most difficulty with. We're talking about applicants who come from very different social and cultural backgrounds from Australia. In addition, for school leavers whose parents are on very low income or unemployed, they are either unable to participate in the so-called extracurricular activity or have far more important duties to fulfill for their families. I think that's what I want to talk about. Ju?
Thanks, Margaret. I suppose I'm slightly picking up really on Margaret's concerns that she raised, our concerns about access to information. We were thinking that within New South Wales, we use the University's Admission Centre, but I'm quite aware that other areas will have different, the equivalents of UAC. UAC's the place that a lot of people go to, obviously, for information, particularly school students, because it's the site for applications and things. So we thought it would be very helpful if with our own UAC, and it may not be true for yours in other areas, but for our own UAC, it's actually quite hard to find the information in one place for people who are on bridging and temporary visas. So we were thinking it would be really helpful if you know, in the way we've done it in the past for, they've done it in the past for rural students or whatever, to have an identified slot within the UAC website where they could go, and that would be that process information, i.e. all the steps that are required to make an application, which is, as Margaret says, it needs to be the scholarship in the same place as the course and various other things, and that needs to inform their UAC choice of universities. So if there was one site within UAC, we thought that would be really helpful, which had process, and as an optimal, it would be very nice to have also have links to the scholarships, because at the moment there's a slight confusion for our candidate, you know, our clients about equity scholarships, because whilst it's great they're eligible for those, and I appreciate everybody's efforts to make them more eligible, they're obviously not the sufficient ones for fees. So we were thinking in the best of all worlds, it would be great if there was not only the site, but with a link to the scholarships for the specific universities that are the full fee scholarships. So a collaboration between, you know, the RESIC site, which lists all the scholarships wonderfully, and the UAC. So those were the things we've been talking about, to started a conversation with our UAC about. It may not be true in your area about your equivalent. You may have a very useful site. I just don't know, or we don't just know. And the other thing in relation to UAC was about fees, which is that obviously, as Margaret says, the fees always every time for each part of the process are really hard for our students. And so I talked tentatively, and we've just started these discussions with UAC, which was to ask them to think about some discretionary fees. Now, they said that's been a long-running debate because where do you draw the line on disadvantage? But one of the things that would be useful, and we suggested to them, is that they actually allow that early bird fee, certainly for all of our candidates. That's something that they could do before settling the whole debate, because really it's the best resource people that can get in early and get the cheaper rate. So a few suggestions from us about using UAC in addition to other, all the other avenues, which is like the excellent outreach that a lot of universities do, and attempts to educate in schools and all those things. We just felt that UAC would be a useful supplement. So that's something we'd like to ask your support for and your thinking about, because obviously the universities own the UACs or the equivalent thereof, and so if you can support such an initiative through your routes as well, through the university route, that would be fantastic. So that's ours. That's my bit. Thanks very much, and pass to Bev.
Good morning. I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of a selection of our clients that are not school leavers. These are often mature age people who've had professional careers back in their home countries, but when they come to Australia, their qualifications may not be recognised. One example I've had is that a woman who'd been an occupational therapist in her home country for many years needed to undertake a postgraduate qualification in Australia to be recognised so that she could practice. And of course, she was faced with paying full fees, which at postgraduate level are prohibitive. And she was just doing childminding work, so there was no way she's going to be able to afford that. And there are virtually no postgraduate scholarships on offer. So most of these scholarships for asylum seekers are for school leavers and for undergraduate qualifications. The other thing I wanted to mention is that there are a range of other scholarships, and Jude alluded to those, which aren't the ones specifically for asylum seekers and cover full fees, but there are a range of other scholarships that some of our clients would really like to apply for, but they are restricted to permanent residents. And so they're not eligible to apply for those. So we're wondering if in the case of asylum seekers, that requirement could be waived, because that would be really something that would be very helpful. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
And Ruby and Jill, a Victorian perspective from the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre.
Hello, everyone. I'm taking my mask. We're in a room and we've got requirements here to wear masks if we're in a room with other people. So I will slip mine down so you can understand me. Some really interesting points have been raised and things that I certainly concur with. There are, I particularly think Margaret raised the issue of why are they asking for extracurricular activities in the application, you know, in their personal statement. And I agree with everything she said about that. The other thing is some universities ask for evidence of financial hardship. It would be inherent in a person being a person seeking asylum. It would be very unusual for them not to be experiencing some sort of financial hardship. So, you know, I think that should be taken right out. But what I wanted to talk about specifically, and Ruby will add some detail if you like. Ruby is our scholarship coordinator, and the program has grown over the years. So in Victoria, around 2017, we started what I would describe as collective action around this issue. Scholarships, and the Refugee Council of Australia and the ASRC, our organisation, came together and discussed having an information session for some of the scholarships that were popping up for people seeking asylum. And particularly the scholarships were aiming for the people who came as part of the legacy caseload, people holding BVE, TPV and SHEV. The first couple of years, the information sessions were face-to-face. Well, for the first 3 years, I think, they were face-to-face, and they were enormously successful. The partnership, I guess you could call it a partnership, evolved as universities came on board. And so now we are at a place where we have approximately, well, most of the universities, if not all, in Victoria are involved in this collective. We come together for a tertiary scholarship information session, and we've managed to keep it going through COVID. In fact, the online sessions have opened up the accessibility for people in regional areas to be able to attend. We have a template PowerPoint, which each year the university and the ASRC is involved in this through the delivery of ASVET. So we input our information, it's consistent subtitles, if you like, so that we're following a format and people are getting clear information. It's been, I think, enormously successful. And of course, always communication of information can be always improved, always made better. But I think the evolvement of this model is a testament to collective action and people having the same goals. I think, you know, if you come together to share information, to make access easier for people, you need shared goals. So, and I think that was the premise that this was set at the beginning. So, yeah, and lots of things that Jude and Margaret and Beverly talked about are so relevant, and we've come across them, and particularly the humanitarian visas that Beverly mentioned. And, you know, there are so many humanitarian visas that are offered to people who have gained permanent protection or permanent residency. I actually heard one university say recently, and they were offering about five scholarships to people seeking asylum and temporary refugees, and they had over 300 humanitarian scholarships. So that says to me there are thousands of humanitarian scholarships across the country offered to people who have permanent residency, who will get CSP, who will get HECS, who will be able to take a student loan, but we're probably looking across the country at no more than 200 scholarships. I don't know the exact data. I'm so excited that Sally said that there's a bit of a plan to try and gather some data. But comparatively, we're overstretched. We don't have enough scholarships to meet the demand, nowhere near enough. So they're just a couple of the issues. I could talk for hours on a number of things, but I'm going to pass on to Ruby because I realise time is limited, and I'm happy to answer any questions that I can. Ruby.
Sure. I'll just chat a bit about how we operate our scholarship preparation here. So we do have a mailing list for people who express interest in scholarships, and we do try and expand that to include any schools. We've done some cold calling to schools because we have also found each year there are often people who are coming from year 12 who haven't had that information in time, and also who have been preoccupied with exams, obviously. So are not in a position to apply on time. And we've worked with some of the other universities with, I think, Deakin and Swinburne in the past to present to like career practitioners, to present to the Victorian equivalent of UAC, which is VTAC, as well, to try and get that information into schools early, to get career teachers and year coordinators able to help students with those applications. But doing applications for each university individually is very time consuming, and we do find that managing that time, as well as the extra priorities that people have, is very difficult and can be quite stressful for a lot of people. The other thing, without covering what everyone else has spoken to, the other thing is, I know that a lot of scholarships are at the moment for full-time study, and for people who are in a financially difficult situation, sometimes full-time study may not be the best sustainable for a few years. So I would love to see more scholarships that are available for part-time study, or to be able to reduce the number of units that they take each semester, to be able to balance those other priorities as well. And the postgraduate, as was mentioned, we definitely see, we always see more people than could possibly be accepted for scholarships. So just the competition, even when we do see people who would thrive through a university scholarship, we do know that there just isn't enough, and that competitive, sometimes even when somebody has a brilliant application, there just aren't the right, there's just not enough to support everybody, I guess. And the other barrier that we do see for some people, depending on the course, is the costs of additional tests that they may need to take, such as IELTS, such as CASPER for teaching, these sort of tests as well, that can be a barrier to actually applying for those courses. And there's limited funding for those, for people to complete those. Have I missed anything, do you think, Jill?
I think you've covered quite a bit, but one of the things I did want to mention, going back to something that was mentioned earlier around, I think you mentioned something about people, the cost for people, and that part-time study is something that should be considered more often. But also the other thing that we raised a fair bit with the Victorian Tertiary Scholarships group was, well, the RESIG actually started, is working on that too, I think, but is on-campus work. I remember in the early days when we first started with some scholarships with La Trobe, we really had a lot of discussions at the ASRC and La Trobe about, how do people support themselves, and particularly as people on TPV and Chev, who are the only visa holders who are able to draw on Commonwealth benefits, and their special benefits, and they're reduced compared to other people, but getting a stipend could interfere with that. So yeah, it's something that to be considered, on campus work that could go along with the scholarship to support people in their studies, or to support themselves sometimes. And with mature age students, it's their families. They have families. Look, it's such a huge area. We could do with a whole day, really, but there are a number of things. But before I go, I do want to talk about Plan B. We always talk to applicants about a Plan B, because there are so few scholarships available, because people are obviously and naturally disappointed when they don't get a scholarship. In Victoria, we have ASVET. There's programs across Australia where people are able to go into VET programs. In Victoria, they can go right up to an advanced diploma. So we always say, okay, have a plan B. Work on what would be a good pathway to what you really want to do in the end. What will lead you in the same direction? And maybe one day you'll be able to articulate into a university course. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thanks to our panelists. I know there are others who might want to contribute, and we will do Q&A in a moment. I'll hand over to Rachel, but I just want to recap on some things. Picking up on what Jill said about the expos, we actually had 3 this year. We had Victoria, New South Wales and Western Australia. We were hopeful to have one in Queensland and we just didn't manage to get it up. And they're hosted on our website. I've popped a link in the chat to the recordings from those. The Victorian one will be up presently. A very useful resource. I know we get a lot of traffic in the ReSIG inbox about the expos and that communication. I think, and I want to acknowledge the piece about UAC. I know this is something that Teachers for Refugees are also interested in advocating about and with. I'm going to park that to the side because I think while Jude, you're absolutely right about universities as the kind of owners of the admission centres being able to influence. What I really want today to be about is how universities can respond to some of these points that colleagues have just raised. In particular, I think there are 3 main points that we can focus on. Firstly is this kind of sequencing and scheduling of timing, which was Marg's first point, and the communication about scholarships. The second one was about financial requirements and deposits. That's not common across the country. That is what some universities do, but not every university. So that's something to kind of focus on. We're not here to name and shame. We're not interested in that. We're really interested in creating an environment where we can look for parts of the process that are massageable. We know from university perspectives there are all sorts of really challenging administration, structural, systemic barriers to being able to change wholesale. So what we've heard from is a kind of aspirational ask from community members who are volunteering to help people apply. And I think perhaps the kind of the immediate action, maybe the low-hanging fruit here, is the application process, thinking about what questions are you asking and how might we support students if you have to keep the extracurricular activity component, for example, then what kind of guidance can you give as an institution to help students respond to that, so that people like Marg, Jude, Jill, Ruby and Beverly can support students then to craft statements that can be used across universities rather than having to write essentially a new application for every university. Those are the kind of major points that we'll work and walk into in terms of the breakout rooms that we're going to go into in a minute. But I'll hand over to Rachel Burke. Thank you, Rachel, who will just field some question and answer before we go into breakout rooms, and then we'll come back together and think about this being the first of a series of communications. We don't expect to respond and resolve all of these challenges in an hour and a half. Jill's quite right. We could have a day, if not longer, on this. And in fact, we did in 2017. Lisa and I coordinated with colleagues a big workshop on this in Melbourne. So it's not the first time we've had this conversation, but it's the closest we've got to getting everyone in the room and thinking about changing, perhaps massaging how we do things. Rachel, thank you.
No problem. Okay, so while we have our wonderful panel here with us, we have a great opportunity to kind of build on some of the points that perhaps around those 3 areas that Sally has kind of identified for us there. We've got a couple of points that have been made in the chat, and we've got one on the Google Doc. So we might start with the Google Doc, come back to the chat, and then I might just open it up to the floor for the remaining minutes before we move into our breakout groups to kind of talk more around those 3 areas. So Mark raised the issue in the Google Doc, which was looking at the kind of, we've got a couple of issues there now. Is there any way that UAC can treat TPV and SHEV visa holders as permanent residents this year, given that we know that that's going to change? Is there any kind of sense of that from our panelists' point of view? Do you see that there's any sense of movement around that? And I know that that's not our kind of major focus today, but it has been raised as a key issue. Does anyone want to jump in there and hazard a guess as to whether we have any space to leverage on that? Hello.
I think there's some concern about this at the moment. I think Margaret and Beverly and Jude would probably agree that there's a bit of concern because there tends to be a bit of a knee jerk when there's policy change. And whilst the government has said they will be changing or taking away visas for people with temporary visas, TPVs and CHEVs, there's been no confirmation about BVEs. Yeah, I think we need to, I think this warrants some sort of national summit of universities and people who are engaged with people seeking asylum and people who are temporary refugees to see what can be done consistently. And this is what this forum is about, around, consistent actions, consistent approaches. And I think people may be transitioned within the next year from CHEVs and TPVs onto permanent protection, but certainly not all of them are. There's 19,000. That's not going to happen in the short term. It's going to take a while for that to happen. So there needs to be a transition plan for people who get a scholarship whilst on a TPV or CHEV in particular. I'd like to see it applied to BVEs as well, but we'll see what happens with the government. But there needs to be a transition plan so that if somebody does get a scholarship and they're on a CHEV and then they are given permanent protection, that they're suddenly not told, oh, well, yeah, now there's a bit of a problem because you're eligible for CSP, you can get HECS. They need to have a transition plan.
A transition
They
plan.
don't need to abolish scholarships for people on TPVs and CHEVs and bridging visas. They need to have transitioning to permanent residency.
And there's obviously a place for something like RESEG, with the big picture.
Oh, absolutely.
To make that case. I think we're going to have to be really strong on that point, aren't we? Otherwise, there will be that kind of, oh, well, problem solved kind of issue. Yeah.
I think the advocacy around that will be really important.
Okay.
And I'd love to see that getting a really good start soon.
Fantastic. We've talked about a little bit around, kind of consistency around extracurricular. So what we're actually asking students to talk about in these applications so that, we as universities, we as stakeholders across schools, et cetera, have a good idea of why students are being asked that and how to kind of advise them and support them around that. Rachel, did you want to talk to your point around, some of the positives of asking people to describe a little bit around, or I can read that out if you're in a busy room or something?
Oh, no, I'm good. Hi, Rachel.
Yeah.
Everyone. I was under the impression, this is mainly talking about the scholarships that the school kids apply for as they're going into university. I don't know as much about the ones who are people who are already older who are applying for scholarships. But I kind of I have in the past really appreciated that section in the scholarship applications that asks about extracurricular activities, because if kids are coming into the country in like year 10 or even year 11 and they're applying for scholarships fairly quickly, they don't really have much to put into their scholarship application that's formal schooling or certificates that they've gained through their formal education. And so having the extracurricular section is almost like giving them another bite of the cherry to demonstrate how good they are, in terms of their application for a scholarship. I hadn't actually considered, though, the point that you guys have made, that it actually is an imposition on people to provide extracurricular information. But in terms of the younger ones who are coming into the country, they don't have much to show. And so by giving them that chance, it's actually giving us more to show off about those applicants.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't be it should be additional, if you know what I mean. I don't know if anyone's got comments on that.
I think that's something we should, really focus on. And again, part of the things that sort of Sally has identified in those kind of key 3 areas, because we need to be clear on what actually is the purpose of that so that we can guide and assist people and make it not a burden. But because with so many of things, there's kind of the 2 sides of the story, isn't there? I'm just really conscious that I think there's only a couple more minutes before we move into breakout groups. So I know Alfred wanted to say something, and our panel, do you want to just sort of, Bev, was your comment in relation to Rachel's point?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm talking to a young woman who's finishing year 12. She's finishing year 11, and she's got the hint that she needs to do extracurricular. So she's scrambling in her last year at high school to try and find some opportunities to do extracurricular stuff just
Yeah.
to put on her resume. And I think that, I mean, that's something that I think is a bit sad, because she's got other, I suppose, obligations at home, but she feels that she's not done anything. And
Yeah.
so she's just desperate to put something into her resume. And I mean, it's just form filling. And I felt sorry for her.
Yeah. So how
I
can we
don't know
actually,
what, yeah.
yeah,
She's
how can we
actually
kind of
just doing it.
the good sides of this without actually
Yeah.
making it a burdensome thing? And it's almost in a sense borrowing what scholarship programs in sort of elite institutions do, isn't it?
Exactly. It's exactly the American system where,
really
you know,
carefully.
people,
Yeah.
go out and do all sorts of amazing stuff to get a scholarship.
Yes, on top of, I know Alfred, I want to go to Alfred really quickly, and then maybe back to our panel, and then we need to rush to those breakout groups so that we can talk about what we're doing in our institutions. So Alfred, did you?
Thank you,
Yeah,
thank you,
hi.
Rachel. And
Hi.
yeah, I wanted to bring the best approach to this platform, and start by appreciating such kind of platform. Secondly, I wanted to tell you that I have been an asylum seeker in Australia until last year for 5 years. And what you're speaking about kind of resonates with my life experience here. I paid for my high school students for over 5 years because they are considered as international. And at the university also, I want to appreciate what is being done, because I come from a university that has over 400 students on humanitarian visas and over 30 students on asylum seeker scholarships. I wanted to first appreciate all that, but tell you that I think we need to shift and move to where the problem is. I think the problem is on the visa conditions. And the problem is with the Department of Home Affairs, not with the universities and not with anyone on this platform. The Department of Home Affairs gives visas that are very strict and that have conditions that universities cannot jump the rope. They consider us international, and there's no any other way you can be called other than being called international. And if you're international, then the conditions of international blending blends you in that direction. So how do we address the policy, and how do we keep appreciating what's being done and encourage more to be done?
Yes.
I understand we have 3 highlights to look at, but the big problem is somewhere.
Yes, and how can that strengths-based approach be embedded in the processes that we're actually working with in these applications?